Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. What's better than being a wargamer? Well, being a battlefield historian and a wargamer, and all the fun that can entail bringing your experience of walking the fields of real battles onto the tabletop. In this video, I'm joined by Marcus Cribb, a wargamer and battlefield historian, to talk about all things to do with military history, walking those battlefields and playing with toy soldiers on the tabletop.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
So, Marcus, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the channel and talk all about things wargaming, really. But we're going to pretend it's about history and some of your jobs in history. So I've given a brief introduction already, but you're far better placed than me to do it. So why don't you sort of tell the viewers a bit about some of your background and some of your jobs in history, really?
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm one of these people that's actually just really lucky that I've had really nice jobs. So my local job when I was growing up as a young lad, except for in the village pub, I got to work in the Tank Museum. That was my summer holiday job in Bovington, in Dorset. I grew up down the road, and so my summer holiday job was walking around and being one of the people in a black polo shirt that answered questions about tanks or where are the toilets was probably the second most asked question. But that's how I kind of cut my teeth. And I went back there every year over the summer at university and going on, and I ended up helping organise like the midday display. I was the guy who got 8 mums and dads and put them in the back of a FE432, and we did like a Dad's Army style attack with deactivated Lee Enfields and beat the bad guys who had a Jolly Roger out their tank, and it was great. And it did also have it did also have a massive wargaming weekend. They filled all the halls with trestle tables and did huge war games there. But how I got into the current bit is after a stint in Portsmouth working on HMS Warrior 1860 and then the main dockyards where there's HMS Victory and HMS M33. So I did a bits around there, but I was just quite busy because it was weddings and events. I got to manage the Duke of Wellington's house, number 1 London, Apsley House, for English Heritage, there for quite a few years. Loved that job. Left because it was the end of COVID and bits because of that. But I then got hands-on with literally the Duke of Wellington's stuff, everything, medals, teeth, walking stick, furniture, busts, and the medals, the ones you see out, are only the tip of the iceberg, including getting out his Army Gold Cross, which has all the clasps for his different battles, he has so many clasps it'd be impractical to wear because it'd be all the way down here, and getting to help, clean some of his Field Marshal batons. And what I hadn't realised underneath it all is, as a teenage lad, I grew up not just watching and reading Sharpe. I actually fell asleep watching the DVDs of Sharpe on loop, I think, when I first discovered them, and went into school humming Over the Hills and Far Away. So that kind of just came out. And even though I left there, the Napoleonic stuff carried on massively. So much so that I started writing a book and doing all the podcasts and doing online debates, structured debates, not just calling people out, and doing what I got known for was on Twitter and doing On This Day and researching more things about the Duke of Wellington, and it encouraged me to find more. And then at the end of lockdown, we were just saying beforehand, a bit too late, I then started buying 28mm Napoleonic models, and funnily enough, the first thing I was going to do was the South Essex Light Company for skirmish, which gave me a good excuse to do redcoats and 95th rifles. And then I just went overboard and bought as many 95th rifles as I could on the side, whilst I was then going and working for the National Trust. So there's some lovely links in there, but I've been really lucky, and I've kind of reached the point in my career as well that I can say to people, do you know what? Last night I put on the TV and some podcasts, and I just painted for ages. And not that many people look at me like I've got 2 heads either, because they're all history nerds in different ways. So yeah, it's quite good.
Oh, it sounds like some of those jobs, or some of them being around Portsmouth as well. They love visiting Victory. So many things are just what a fun time. I must imagine being there, getting to go on those ships all the spend. Maybe if you're there all the time, it's not so exciting, but I just love it. And I listen to your list of jobs. I'm just thinking, wow, what fun you must have had being able to be there, but also having that close connection to history as well.
It was amazing, like watching the sunsets on HMS Warrior. So I used to like be the events manager. So you'd be there till 2 a.m. running somebody's wedding, but sometimes the band would be starting and the wedding would be in full flow, and you don't have much to do apart from clearing everybody out at the end of the night. Then you just kind of patrol. We called it answer history questions normally from the drunk uncle, which I get it. That'd be me in a few years. And you just sometimes just got to watch the sunset with your team, and we were good friends. And again, just enjoy being on the ship, and there's bits and pieces that they don't have because you roped off, and you can just go and give people private tours and show them the sick bay if they're interested, because they happen to be into historical medicine, and you just got a different perspective onto it. And there were certainly events you did where there's only like 3 or 4 people doing a private dinner. So when they were having their dinners, you just basically got the ship to yourself. There'd be one cook, one catering manager, and about 4 or 5 people, and you've got the ship to yourself for a few hours and get your hands on with the history like that, and really exploring places that you're allowed to be but no one goes to. That was great as well. I do got a soft spot for Portsmouth as well. It's one of the few cities I'd go back and live again in.
Yeah, I can imagine. I love any museum or historical site. Excuse me, and just being in historical places, it's like a happy place for me. So I imagine working there would be brilliant. Tell me more about the working at around the Duke of Wellington stuff. So what was your day job actually like? What did it consist of?
So I was the operations manager. So as with my career, it's just anything that kind of comes up. So you do the daily rota, you open to the public, you're the first point of call for questions. But behind the scenes, you're doing all the risk assessments and doing all the facilities management. But it also, because you're doing the facilities management, I have to be careful what I say here. You're the first point of call for the current Duke. The current Duke lives next door. And when he has a problem, it's my job to fix it. So that can be plumbing, but it could also be a leaking roof. And I, because of that, had to go round and spot the roof. I have to be careful with giving away personal details, the roof leak. But one of those ones I did whilst he was living at one of his other estates. And I just got an email that said, with gratitude, Wellington. And I screenshotted that. And you'll probably know why, because that's what's on Sharpe's telescope.
Yes.
So I was like, it's similar. It's very 21st century. He's giving me an email that I've got on his telescope. And that to me was brilliant, kind of getting those things. And also he's got his own personal collection, and getting to see that and spending time with the Duke and getting to know him as a person behind the airs and graces as well. So that was a real privilege. You know, I worked with him at a very, very low level, but I did enjoy that, and I enjoyed working in that site a lot. A fantastic team I had as well, which always really helps. But kind of going in, and often I'd be going in on the train, being a commuter with my headphones on, and I'd be pausing as I went to go sign in for the day, because I've probably got Sharpe on and he's just about to like smash through the French lines, and I'm like, this is a bit surreal, but this is a history nerd's dream right now. And I did enjoy that. And whenever I went to even internal meetings, they were always, you're the guy who manages number 1 London. And you're just like, yes. So I was really lucky to do that.
And so you mentioned around that time, it sort of tied into your love of Sharpe, but you also did a little bit of living history and reenactment as well. I know it's not something you're doing at the moment, but was that around the same time, or was it kind of inspired by?
Yeah, it was. So I stopped because of COVID, basically. It changed so much. Everything stopped. In fact, my last event was, I'm sure, February, when COVID was coming in at the end of February. And we all sat in a room with dust on us in barracks in Kent, and wondering, what dusty throats? Is this COVID? Is it dust? But yeah, I'd hired some brilliant reenactors for work, some living history interpreters, that people that their day job is they go out and talk about these things. They're fantastic. Some of them were surgeons, and they would talk about Georgian surgery so well that you think they must be a trained doctor in the real life. And then I also hired some brilliant guys from the 68th Durham Light Infantry. Strong northeast accents, about 1 in 10 words. I go, oh, missed that. But they were brilliant, and they were so passionate, and they looked so good. And all day they'd be in their uniforms, walking up and down, talking to members of the public, and just sort of genuinely nice people. But then I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll go off, and I, because of the love of Sharpe, joined the 95th Rifles reenactment group. And it was great fun, you know, firing those Baker rifle replicas. And also it was really good drinking club as well. So also getting to do a bit of that. And they did push it, and we did do some woodland skirmishing. So it wasn't just all in an arena with the general public watching you. And I remember a very good weekend and you do learn a bit. You've got these very tall shako hats, like the picture behind me, and you're going through the woods. Well, the first thing that happens is a branch just hits that. And I know when they filmed Sharpe, the actors hated those hats and they threw them away. But you might get it for marching, but the moment you started running and skirmishing, those hats are getting lost. Like there's no way they're surviving. So it did give me a bit of an insight of that as well. Yeah, I did enjoy that. I now know what black powder tastes like when you bite too far down a cartridge and things. And it's a very expensive hobby, and because most of the kit's made by hand in the Napoleonic bits, it's one of the most expensive. People telling me, I'm sure there are cheaper eras. People I think I met who are doing medieval were laughing at the Napoleonic for how expensive it is. But
I can imagine.
I would encourage
yes.
people to go out and do it, because if you want that insight, and it is quite camaraderie based, that there's lots of drinking and families, and people take, their kids to run around all day, and then dad and mum go off and do a battle and then come back in an hour's time, and the kids are just playing with other kids. So it's got a nice thing from that point of view as well.
I can imagine actually. There's I live quite close to Tewkesbury, and it's that Tewkesbury's a very different era of battle, but we go every year, and all the reenactors stay for the whole weekend, and they have a camp that's built up the way it would have been. Well, not really, but similar kind of thing. And you can walk around, and the whole family's there, the kids, their other halves, all dressed, all living that way, cooking and eating and drinking that way. And it's what an absolute fun thing to do for a weekend. So I imagine I can understand why you had such good fun doing it. I'd love to, but maybe it's passing in terms of time to do that in my life now. But great stuff. So let's talk a little bit more, because you talked about battlefields and things. You do battlefield tours, and including on your YouTube channel, which I've been watching loads of them recently, little shorts and things you've been in recently. Talk to me a little bit about how you got into doing that, and how is expanding at the moment into your YouTube.
Yeah, thank you. The YouTube's quite a new thing. I do very small shorts, but I need to get into video editing. That again came from number one, London. I took myself off to Waterloo with my father, who is kind of like a jack of all history. He doesn't know much, but he knows lots of little bits. And we used to go on self-drive tours, do like 30 cores advance through Arnhem, but in reverse, because he'd planned it, and his logistic planning was a bit off. And he was like, "Oh, we could just divert this way," and then. And I kind of got a love of going to all the battlefields with him, and I wouldn't do any of this stuff if it wasn't for my youth doing that. And then as I got older, I was doing all the driving, because he's now partially sighted, and it was great fun. And then I went to Waterloo, I think twice, and then mutual friend basically asked me, "Look, you've been there twice. You know what you're talking about. Will you run a tour for one of my units in the army?" And did one. Seemed to go well, because he hired me to do a second. I then took myself off, and on the anniversary of the battle, did one out there at Waterloo for free, because nothing was being done for I think it was 203rd anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo. And we were there on the day, and about 20, 30 French reenactors turned up and walked around, and a few rode around on horses, and some French Belgians did a quick memorial service, but there was about 10 of them. And it was just really strange that nothing had been organised, but it was great being there on the day. And I just really liked doing it. I think it's where, because I'd worked in museums, for example, on HMS Warrior, I didn't know anything about Victorian naval history and how engines and sails work, 'cause it had both, and square meals and all the points of it. But I was taught it, and then I gave tours, a bit like at the Tank Museum. I learned it all from the people who did it. And it's something I really like doing. I could not learn lines and do panto in the village hall or amateur dramatic play. I can't be in character. I'm just me, and I apologize enough for that. But I quite like explaining storytelling. I think is what is, and bringing the history to life. And it, when you're either on a ship or sat inside a tank, as I used to be growing up, or stood on the battlefield, obviously it does a lot of the work for you. And you go, this is where history happens. And right here, and you can go, here's the first-hand account of a guy who fought here. And often they are quite brutal. You know, he will be talking about the guy who stood next to him who's getting his head shot off. And it's quite somber, but there's a special feeling, the connection to the past, that you can wind that back. And yes, like Waterloo, we always talk about like the 200 and almost 10 years of ploughing that's changed the battlefield. But you can also then get people, and Waterloo is one of the best example of wargamers sometimes represent Waterloo with a big green field with 3 farms and sometimes 1 ridge. Well, when you go down and stand opposite La Haye-Sainte, you can't see Hougoumont because there's a subtle move in the ground, and you can't see other parts of the battle. And then you start to understand why big mistakes took place, like the King's German Legion getting caught in line, and also things like Wellington having to ride up and down. And it gives you that appreciation of kind of the soldier's eye view. Because if you're wargaming, you're kind of getting an eagle eye view of everything. And you need to put yourself down at 15, 28 millimeter height. And I just love being there. And the thing is, most people want to be there if you're there, either if they're doing a day trip or if they've come on a tour and they're making a real effort. And then you get the bit afterwards that places like Waterloo's got a brewery and distillery, places in Spain and Portugal that I now do tours, and they have local wines. And you then go out and you talk about the history and your shared interests, passions, and yeah, things like Sharpe always come up, and favorite films. And there's just some really nice connections, and people, much like Wargaming, quite welcoming because it's quite an open community, but it does have a community feel to it as well. So the Wargaming side links into the tours, and the tours are something that I'm wanting to do more of. I'm wanting to do more up here in Scotland now that I've moved up to Bonnie, Scotland. There's battlefields on my doorstep, and some that people don't know about. Some that are very famous. So it's a bit further afield, but Culloden is arguably really famous. But there's actually some really interesting ones like Ruthven Barracks, where Sergeant Malloy and 11 soldiers, there was 12 of them in total, held off the Jacobites overnight with only 1 casualty. And that's barely talked about, but it's a really beautiful site. It's now in the middle of a nature reserve, but there's loads of the barracks remain. There's Highbridge, which was the first shots of the 45 uprising. Beautiful spot just by the Commando Memorial outside Fort William. And that's the other thing about battlefields. Is just got back from Portugal and Spain, and sometimes you just take a stop. And these places, you know, without the French and the British and the Allies fighting, actually can be really pretty places. So it's a nice excuse to visit them whilst it's all peaceful and quiet.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've not done too many. I did Waterloo a couple of years ago as part of a bit of a camper van tour with a family. So I had to be quite good. We started in Normandy and we went to Germany. We went through Luxembourg. And we went back through Belgium. So I managed to get quite a lot of World War II stuff in that, and Waterloo as well. But I had to balance that off with keeping people happy as well. Yeah, if you've got nice enough weather, we mostly had dryish weather. But if you've got beautiful weather and beautiful countryside, it's lovely to be outside. So I can fully understand why you're having an absolute ball being there, talking about something you're passionate about and being in these beautiful surroundings and things as well.
It became quite a running joke when I gave a tour in Portugal. Everyone was saying, you always stand on a stone and point to things. And then by the end of the week, I was looking for the stone and pointing. And sometimes it even like tied in with paintings of officers or riflemen standing on stones and pointing at things in the distance. And yeah, I think whilst I've got relative youth on my side, I am literally running around these places because I'm not into sports, but I imagine it's what people get when they walk into their favorite team's stadium.
Yeah.
I kind of get from a battlefield, but I also then respect that they are where people fought and died, and I that's always in my foremind. Well, I'm still on furlough from it, but I did about 12 years in the Army Reserve. I was the TA, so I'm very respectful of that. But even then, it's interesting and exciting. So it's a difficult balance, but I do get very excited by visiting battlefields. It is, to me, one of the most exciting times of the year. And when this will go out, I've only got back a week ago from Portugal and Spain, where myself and Christian from Redcoat History Channel, top guy, we filmed a lot of battles, fields and battle scenes and things. So that hasn't come out yet, but it will come out April, May, June 2025 is the plan. So you'll see lots of me there. I'm sorry, but it's should be quite good, especially the drone footage.
I'm really looking forward to those. Really, it's a fantastic channel anyway. And I'm sure lots of people watching this will have no doubt binged much of his stuff on there. I think that was the first time I saw you was on his channel being interviewed as well. So it may well have been actually. But it's absolutely fantastic. I can't wait for those. So talking more about those battlefield sites then, do you have a favorite battlefield site, and what is it?
I did, but I think it's changed. So I've kind of got a top list. Waterloo's always special because it's Waterloo, because it's where we defeated, I wasn't there. It's where Wellington and the Allies defeated Napoleon, a man who gets too much praise. Napoleon is somebody in history who's revered too much. And there's a side rant there, but I loathe the man that caused that many deaths. And it's too easy to praise him. And actually, he wasn't a very nice person in his personal life, but he was bad for the world. He was. And the counter argument that normally tends to be he wrote the Code Napoleon, which he didn't write personally, and then flags, and he waved eagles around. I simplify history there because I'm biased, but I don't like the guy. He reintroduced slavery. I don't like dictators anyway. But Waterloo's always special, and it will be, and it will continue to be. And that's a good thing because it lets us talk about a lot of history there. And it's got layers to the history about how many different nations were there, and the argument about the Prussians coming to save Britain. Well, they didn't actually, because that was Wellington's plan. And it's just great. And the field has a special quality to it. But yes, some of the ones in Portugal and Spain are probably prettier and less visited. So I was saying until recently that Relitha, spelled Relica, is one of my favourites, and that's because the second French position. So that's this Wellesley right at the beginning of the campaign, 1808. He's advancing down on the French. They hold a small hill. They retreat back because they're about to be cut off and hold a second hill. That's not really a hill. It's on the edge of cliffs, massive cliff drops. Kind of one that when I take people there, you have to warn them, don't stand next to the edge, and then they lean off the edge, and there's a good 80-foot drop or something. Wow. And you can't believe that a battle was fought there. It's just, there was these gullies that they managed to get up, but there were people firing down on those. So that's just incredible as a scene. Quite similar to that is Busaco, where it's on a mountain Sierra and there's beautiful views, but it's often quite foggy. And then you've got places like combat on the Coa, near the beautiful town of Almeida, and Almeida's a battlefield. At least triple. And the Coa is a beautiful site, and it gives you there the light division to talk about, and Black Bob Crawford. But then recently, first time I've been there and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, Barba del Puerco, which is just inside Spain, and that's where 2 companies of 95th Rifles, later reinforced with another 3, held off a French surprise attack at this tiny narrow bridge that the French managed to get over. But they couldn't get up the cliff on the other side because it's such a zigzag down. And we were there, and just no one around. And there were, I think, red kites or a type of kite flying overhead, certainly a large bird of prey. And it's in huge, granite boulders. And it was just stunning. Few people have been there, but it's a bit of a hike. So that's there. And then I hadn't been to Salamanca and Talavera before. And those are big set piece battles. but that's very different going to a set piece battle to some of the smaller actions. So I do find myself gravitate towards actually the smaller battles, and I suppose that links to the wargaming thing. That I think at heart I'm a skirmish kind of role playing kind of wargamer. I want to name my characters. And if they've got a name, they're going to do better, right? And I want that individuality. That said, if I go the other side, I probably want to do the really big campaign map battles, and you're moving around divisions, brigades. What I've not done in the wargaming world is the in-between level with brigade kind of level command. Really from painting models, I spend too much time on 28mm, and that's going back to an old Warhammer thing of mine growing up, and that's the kind of my comfortable scale. But yeah, the battlefields, it's hard to choose a favorite one. Waterloo is always going to be the most special, but I have to say the Portuguese-Spanish border, as well as Relitho, which is a bit closer to Lisbon, is probably my favorite. It also helps there's very good local wine. And when I was out there with Christian, we were saying actually places like Almeida, because it's a leafy Portuguese town and the Coas about a 5-minute drive nearby, they're the kind of place that you could bring a family and then do like a vineyard tour or something.
Yes.
But yeah.
I'm hoping that was in my future camper van family tour where around Portugal and Spain, where I just happened to plot in a few battlefield sites. But we'll
it's the kind of thing you go, oh, Salamanca is a beautiful town. We had lunch on the main square. It's really old, very much the place that you go and spend 2 days on holiday. And just so happen there's 2 hills outside that you really want to see. I think that's the way to do a tour. I mean, I'm lucky here in Scotland, for example. There's a beautiful village about 45 minutes drive for me called Dunkeld that everybody goes to because of Instagram. There's the Hermitage nearby, which is a waterfall next to a folly, and it's stunning. It looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. It really does look like, I often say, if Peter Jackson hadn't filmed in New Zealand, he had to film in Scotland. But the town was the scene of a 1689 Jacobite Rising battlefield. Only a couple of buildings survived because of street fighting, which is quite unusual. But those kind of battlefields are quite nice because there's often a coffee shop nearby as well. So there's ways and means of figuring out these kind of battlefields. And you just happen to walk past and say to your partner, oh, is that a memorial over there? I'm just going to go and look at it. And then, oh, I didn't know there was a memorial here to the Cameronians. Okay, well, I'm just going to take 5 minutes. Now I'm here. So they can be subtle ways of doing it.
They certainly can. It reminds me actually of being on holiday in Kefalonia many years ago with a girlfriend who's not my wife, or someone prior to that, and making her walk quite a way. It was about 35 degrees that day, and there's a memorial where some Italian soldiers were killed after they surrendered to the Germans. The Germans basically machine gunned them. If you've read Captain Corelli's Mandolin or seen the film, you'll know the reference to that. And there's a memorial for it, and I really wanted to see it. So we walked a long way in the heat. She, we were in our early 20s then. She wasn't too impressed, but yeah, these things you do.
I think I remember my father doing similar on a holiday to France when I must have been about 12, and we went to this hilltop under the guise that it was a beautiful view of the valley, but it was where the French officer cadets from the cavalry school at Saumur had taken their weapons out of the thing during the college during the German invasion of France. Get my words the right way around. And they held off the Germans at a bridge, and we just kind of my father said, look, we're going to go there because we'd been to the French Tank Museum, I think, the day before. But we just pretended that it was a nice walk, and there happened to be a memorial when we got there, and then carried on. My mother, I don't think she really was any the wiser. She believed us it was a nice walk at the time.
Yeah, well, there's lots of them around. They become kind of, if you're not interested in them, they're just nice scenery usually, aren't they? Let's go back to the wargaming connection with the battlefields then. Sure. So you talked about you've recently visited lots of new sites, and it's given you some ideas of how you might play games on the tabletop, I suppose, especially skirmish style things. Have you got some new inspiration or ideas from recently visiting battle sites?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways of doing it. I would quite like to do the kind of the campaign levels with decision making. Having just taken inspiration, I spent the last couple of days watching Preston Pans Museum in southeast Scotland are doing a real life 1745, 1746 campaign of decision making, and then they stop and have a battle each time. But you could take the battles out and kind of do decision making. This seems to be the larger part of that. And it would be quite interesting when you go to the battlefields and see decisions made at a big strategic level. For example, my one always go back to is when, well, it wasn't Wellington then, but when Wellington returns in 1809, he goes up and liberates Porto. But actually the closest army is over the border in Spain, and there's kind of a what if there, and there's 1,000 what ifs, especially around Waterloo. The battlefields themselves, now some of them are set pieces, like Talavera, it's set piece battles in many ways. There's night attacks and things go wrong. But then there's ones that could have gone very differently. I guess that's why we kind of like them. It's the what ifs, like Salamanca, two armies marching in parallel for weeks, never mind that day. And then Wellington sees a gap created in Marmont's lines by the 7th Division and 3rd Division marching in. And he famously has the chicken leg and said, by God, that would do. And he charges everybody in. Well, what if the line hadn't been created? What if battles still had to be joined and they just decided? Or that gap was bigger, or Marmont had... Yeah, so there's things there. And then the skirmish ones, the skirmish ones... You'd either got to go amazing on scenery, I think, on some of them, or just kind of let your imagination do. But the bridges, so like Barba del Perco, which had a very similar situation at the Bridge of Vera, up in near the Pyrenees, on one of the last French offensives. Again, it's riflemen holding out overnight against huge, overwhelming forces. Same with, they had one on the border with the Loyalist Legion, which were an amazing unit that nobody talks about. I'm sure somebody out there has got a Loyalist Legion army, which were green, musket armed Portuguese with British officers fighting in the hills against the French. But they had a couple of cannon and they defended a bridge and they made a real nuisance of themselves. And I think there's that kind of element where... It's often where the Allies are undersized, and you're kind of supporting the underdog against, a big imperial army that are conquering another nation, and it just kind of you are supporting the guys who are trying to liberate. And in British history, we're not always the good guys, but over there we're trying to liberate our allies, and horrible things have been done to them. So we do feel like the good guys in this situation, and And there's that these bridges, these skirmish actions are straight torn out of the sheets of Sharpe, really, as well. So a few of them mixed in. The other one was the raid on Almaraz we went to. I can't confirm or deny if I jumped a farmer's fence to get there, but I did. And but it was a stunning spot. But it was in the most recent Sharpe book. It was under the command of General Roland Hill, who's somebody I admire. And actually, there was more of the French fort remaining than I expected. I expected there to be like a wall and a ditch. But actually, there was the remains of a tower. It was probably originally like 3-4 stories. And there's probably a good story and a half left. And so to explore that, and then I'm starting to think, it's actually quite nice to do ones where the Allies, the British, are on the attack. And the French could be on the defence, and then actually you can start to flip things around, and actually, that would fit into a large-scale 28mm game, because you would be having units on an attack, but you could probably shrink it down into different levels and different rules. It would be quite flexible because it's quite a large unit. So you see these ones. The one I can never know how you do. I don't know how you do Relitha, because you need cliffs, and you'd need so much foam to model that battlefield. It would be difficult. I know people who've done it, but I think you need more foam than you would initially take into consideration. But they are. But again, it's that thing of going, I think you should probably visit there before you wargame it sometimes, which is a great excuse for a really nice holiday. And they all kind of tie together for that. I'm certainly gonna get out some foam this summer and start doing some scenery modelling. That's the inspiration that I've learned.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Having been there recently, I imagine you're absolutely full of ideas. We started talking a few months ago, and I was going to get you to give me loads of advice on doing some kind of Talavera thing, and I was looking at Wargames Epic Scale at that point, and if something maybe a division's worth of stuff, and I may still do that. But obviously, talking to you a little bit more, I've picked up some more 28 mil things again, and I think that might be a better way to go, at least for playing games of Sharpe, which is essentially the inspiration. But also, I suppose you could do something combined. I don't know if you've ever thought of this, where you almost have two table setups. You might want a few friends to do the bigger battle. Maybe you're doing Talavera at divisional level or more, and then you've got a small table setup where it's just that charge for the eagle at the end, when you've got just a I don't know, 20 or 30 men on each side doing that final fight to get to the center of the column to do that eagle. And whether the actions on the small tabletop could feed back and give bonuses on the other tabletop. I always think ideas like that can be really fun and engaging.
Well, and there's historical precedents for things like that. So the example I'll use, you'll know from Sharpe in Sharpe's Eagle, where in the film he kills Daniel Craig, but there's a night attack the night before the Battle of Talavera. Now, actually, it was quite a large scale attack, not like in the films. It was a major French effort, but you could do things like that, or holding a bridge and supply lines in a fictional, if you're wargaming a slightly fictionalized version. And for me, the historical link, and I'm sorry if I'm going off the historical here, but when I was a young lad, one of the best campaigns that was being run, which links as rule set, was in White Dwarf Warhammer for Armageddon.
Yeah.
And that's what I grew up with about that era. And it's what me and my friends used to play as Floorhammer. We used to lay out on our parents' dining room floor, and we would play like 3 games, and then the next game, whoever won that one would get a free bombardment and things like that. So there's ways and means of doing that. And certainly there are actions in the Peninsular War where there's pure cavalry actions and the retreat to A Coruña. And that could then affect, do you get cavalry in the next game? There's elements there, supplies, intelligence, even if you're just going for first turn. And elements there that you can actually probably build in a skirmish game, which affects a big picture game, or vice versa, that if you were just doing a purely strategic game where you're moving around things on a map, but actually you don't want to fight one of the big battles, but you could fight out skirmish battles to gain intelligence or steal the march on the enemy, who controls the bridge, whether it's the fictional bridge like in Sharpe's Eagle, for example. There's nice ways there of doing little war games, and I think actually the history is actually as good as the fiction in the Peninsular War. Some of the characters who do kind of storm into the breach, or the first-hand accounts we've got, I often encourage people to read the first-hand accounts in the Peninsular War. There's a young lad called William Grattan who wrote about the 88th Connaught Rangers. And he's writing some of these scenes about him storming into the breach and smashing aside French bayonets with his sword and seeing the enemy's teeth. And it reads like a Sharpe adventure novel, but it's real life. So therefore, if you take that into the wargaming, actually, there's a lot of inspiration there to fight the games and build up characters. I still think there's a whole thing there with kind of war bands, experience points, campaigns. And where the Peninsular War, I think, is really interesting is you've got people like the guerrillas, the partisans, who weren't always good. So you can end up with multiplayers because, the partisans could be a third faction who will fight both for the right money kind of element. Now, historically speaking, they did have a huge part to play in the liberation, but some of them were just kind of bandits as well. So there's all sorts of different elements, and I'm seeing a few things at the moment that are being done really nicely with silver bayonets, which kind of, if you take out the werewolves and elements like that, actually still has really nice narrative elements in them. Whether that's too small because you're only talking like 8-10 people, or you want to build it up and go down like the chosen men route, which so you get a couple of different squads, but they would certainly feed into some of the real life things. The Peninsular War is not all huge amounts of red coats versus blue coats and having huge blocks. There were some of these really small dynamic actions, and also there's some fantastic characters of spies. I often talk about John Waters, who escaped from the French, and when he was captured, Wellington said, bring his bags along, we know he's going to escape. And he like escapes the next day, just rides away on his horse. He also then brings intelligence and across a river. And my favorite point of the Peninsular War is basically there's him, a barber, and a priest cross the River Douro in a boat, and then because they get that one boat, they're then able to get 4 barges, and then they steal Porto back from the French. And I'm just like, it starts to sound like a joke, you know. There's a spy, a priest, and a barber in a boat, but you know, there's then adventure role playing. Is the intelligence officer actually a role playing game, and he's traveling through? And one of my friends did that, who was role playing us as subalterns, young officers who got stranded in north coast of Spain. And we had a great time. Like, what are we stumbling upon? And do we trust anybody when the Spanish says, yes, of course, come into my village? You know, whose side are they really on? So the wargaming side of the Peninsular War is really broad, because there's politics, there's logistics, there's small scale action, there's large scale action, and if you want to go down the other side, there's big fancy uniforms, there's very drab uniforms, there's big blocks of troops, there's small, like, little actions, and there's lots of scenery as well. One thing, as a little note, actually, I don't know if I haven't told anyone I did this. When I went over, I've never collected soil from the battlefields before. And it's something I see people who visit battlefields do. But I took a couple of extra bits from the top of the Koa, because I remember visiting it before, I think it's like really fine gravel of granite around there, and it has a really nice quality to it. And I took some extra bits, and what I'm going to do is mix it in with some of my basing materials. Lovely. So that when I come and base my Napoleonics, they can be based with real life battlefield soil.
Which is amazing. Lovely little touches like that war gamers completely get, and non-war gamers are just scratched their heads and think we're crazy.
Non-war gamers are going to think that's so weird. But hopefully people watching this video will get like, oh yeah, you could take some tiny bits of gravel and sand from real battlefields and put them on your bases.
Yeah,
you're only talking like that much in the pots, and it goes a long way.
Yes, oh, absolutely. I think it's a brilliant idea. But some of the things you're talking about there, and I'm looking at Chosen Men myself, and I've got Silver Bayonet, and I thought about those kind of ideas. Something I think was quite interesting is that I've got lots of wargaming friends that only play science fiction or fantasy, but love Sharpe, watched it, read it, but find Napoleon, it's a little bit scary. They see it as the massive battles, loads and loads of miniatures to paint. But what you've been describing there is, well, you can make it fun. You can make it a story. You could delve into the history if you want. You could just play scenarios lifted straight out of the fiction and have loads of fun with it. You're dipping your toe into history, but you're also making it almost boys' own comic kind of stuff, which sometimes removes that little element of seriousness to military history and makes people a little bit more open to do it. I know when I play World War II bolt action, for me it is very much commando comic, because it means feels a little bit less gruesome to you, and I think that's a nicer way to look at it. So, and I think you can apply that same kind of thing via Sharpe to skirmish wargaming with Napoleonics, and people watching this that have ever tempted to give it a go, you can do that. You can paint 10 miniatures, you can paint 30 miniatures, and there are rule sets that enable you to do that. So you really are playing your Warhammer skirmishy style games as well. So loads of possibilities.
I still think the perfect rule set for skirmish hasn't been written, because it should be somewhere between Warhammer, Mordheim Necromunda, and Lord of the Rings Warhammer, but put into historical. I'm sure somebody's written it unofficially,
Yes.
but that kind of right scale is difficult to find. I like just kind of slightly removing the history. So we were saying, one of my unstarted projects, I'm pointing to it because I'm on my painting desk, is I've got some French that are going to be converted to be Loup's brigade, who's in Sharpe's battle. The reason being is they wear grey rather than blue, so slightly different, but they got these fur wolf pelts. But my idea being is I've got them, and then the South Essex, they could be in any battle in any part of Spain and Portugal. And a bit like Bernard Cornwell does himself in his books, you know, you're then not stealing somebody else's glory, you're not treading on the toes of the real people, but you can be right there adjacent to it and take the inspiration from it. And there's no reason you can't scale that up. I've seen lots of different historical regiments, not just Sharpe. The other fiction books are available, and people have them marked out on the tabletop for large scale, and there'll be, I think it's like the Wessex Rangers or one in one series of books, and they're like, this is them, and then you've got the South Essex, then you've got the 112th and things, regiments that didn't really exist or for much not period of time, and you can actually you can do that, and you can still recreate like the battles that you want to because you've read about the Battle of Talavera. And yeah, I've got a friend of mine in Ireland, and he does that really nicely. He has some real life stuff, he's got some historical things, and he's put some of the historical regiments in because he's read about them in his books, and he wants to put that in there, and it allows you to do some outrageous actions, and you can kind of slightly role play it as well.
Yeah, I think it just shows how flexible wargaming can be, and it should be fun ultimately. And if fun for you is a complete reenactment as much as you possibly can, and loads of strict detailed rules around it, great. But if you want something a little bit lighter, well, there's loads and loads and loads of opportunity at the moment. And I actually agree with you about that perfect set of rules, because I quite like Chosen Men, and I quite like Silver Bayonet, but you want something that feels like one set of rules does it all. You almost want the way Warhammer Fantasy can scale between skirmish and sort of 100 miniatures on the table. You almost want that rule set converted maybe to work with the Napoleonic period, because I think it would work quite well.
If you or any of your viewers remember like old Warhammer, where it used to be about 4 or 5 regiments or 4 or 5 units, and you used to buy a box of Space Marines, and then that would be like half your army before you like that's kind of the right scale, where you've got like 20 to 50 depending on their elite level is probably about the right scale, because you can still do tactics, you can still do flanking, you can use terrain. And I think I've got some beautiful terrain. There's some companies out there making some amazing stuff now with laser cutting as well as 3D printing, but I've got some amazing MDF to like do a whole Portuguese village, and it's just stunning stuff that was laser cut out of MDF, and you do your own plaster building. And there's a whole different set there about going, I'm putting fake flowers on something that I've just plastered. I'm on to a different hobby here, but there's some brilliant sides to the hobby that you can kind of do that with. And I think just finding that perfect scale to me hasn't been made, and that's nothing against the other ones. They've all got their merits for simplicity and bits, but I've also picked up 1 or 2 that I was going to look at a different historical period. And it was about like, it started talking about putting down different tokens to represent different things. And I realized by the end, and the rule set came with tokens, but you needed like 50 different tokens to have different potential on the board. And I was like, that's too complicated. You've tried to emulate real life too much. You've got to realize that this is real life. This has been scaled down for the tabletop, and we can't have every single action represented by a token. It was just a bit too much. It's meant to be fun, and I think that's the thing. It's a hobby, and people are here to have fun. I don't imagine I'll ever go to like competition where it's ranked in that kind of point of view, though I've only heard good things, and actually there's part of me kind of goes, I really do want to do that, and everyone says it's really good fun. I would worry that somebody's going to be there to win, and I'm just not that competitive.
I think it depends on the game system. I don't know about when it comes to skirmish level Napoleonics. I'm not sure there's any competitive events out there at the moment, or events. It may be just maybe there should be. I'm sure the right rule set would come on, but obviously for things like Warhammer, which I know you're working on at the moment, there definitely is. So what are you working on at the moment? So you've mentioned your Napoleonics in terms of Lou, which is bizarre because I'm listening to Sharpe's Battle at the moment while I've been working today, and may have something to do with the project I'm maybe pivoting into myself. We ended up doing the same projects, but what else are you working on at the moment, including your Warhammer? It doesn't have to be all historical stuff.
Well, the main thing was going to be South Essex and then Lou, and then trying to get as many characters. And I will share with you all the photos of. I've done all the Chosen Men, many of them kit bashed, because I wanted to have Rifleman Harris have his bigger ginger hair and reading a book. And in one of the Warlord games sets, there was a Italian army notebook and pen set, and I was like, well, that's written into Harris. I can read, so perfect. Yeah. So, bit of background. When I moved, I thought, I really want to get back into Warhammer, but I don't want to start painting an army. It's too expensive. It's too timely. So I'll get into Mordheim. Wartime, something that completely passed me by, but I love the grimdark aesthetic. I'd watched many things, including your set build for the scenery, and I was like, well, I'm not going to do the scenery, but I can do the small scale stuff. And if I get like 4 war bands, then I've got a few options. Yeah, that was a mistake. You know that moment when you're like kind of pulled one thing out of the display case and the whole display case falls out. It was like that watching it topple. So I bought a few sets. Obviously, everything's out of production. So I bought a couple of the what was Empire Militia for old school Warhammer, and I did a few. And then I've got nearly every original model in metal. So the bank balance took but they look fantastic, and they're all laid out downstairs. I've only painted up, just looking up there, so three war bands plus a load of mercenaries. But that's been a huge passion project. So there's one band that are based on Robin Hoods, and so I got the old Bretonians from them. Some of the models you're taking off the shelf, and I love the fact that they've got the date stamp from Games Workshop at the bottom, and some of them are older than me because they're from early 80s. There was actually one on there from the 1970s. So that was nice. And then, I've been really excited by the Old World release. So I've historical wargamers, but I am because that was what I first got into Space Marines, and like everybody does, and I got bored of myself, with Space Marines kind of thing, and got into Warhammer Fantasy when I was younger and did dwarfs. But the one that I always wanted to do, as well as Skaven, was Empire, because I'm kind of like quite a neutral good guy in the middle. So I bought everything when it was re-released the other day.
Yeah, you were showing me your big box. There's a lot in there. It's good shopping.
Yeah, and that doesn't include the made-to-order stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But
I don't have children. I have a dog. So
it was going to keep you busy for a while, definitely.
Yeah. So we currently have a load of knights and steam tanks, and currently kit bashing. But there's elements in there that I'm going, oh, well, it links back to some of the wartime stuff, and what can I kit bash from these to make into wartime? And then we were talking before this recording about back at the 6th edition, peak edition of Warhammer, there was Warhammer Skirmish, which basically is like wartime with all the rules stripped out. You just move individual figures around a battlefield. And it's a really good way of getting some quick games in as well. You're talking about 15, 20 models moving around a village fighting. So I'm definitely thinking of building some of my wartime war bands out, because I've got a load of lovely zombies down here that are done but not based, and I love painting all the blood and guts effects, because that's the other thing of this hobby, that having taken a huge hiatus between my teenage years and now, the paint technology has increased. That there wasn't a thing of washes. You only did highlights if you were elite. You just painted a Space Marine and he went on your table, and your friend painted a Chaos Space Marine, and that was it. There wasn't all this thing about edge highlighting. And now I've got washes, and I'm not a good painter, but it makes me look pretty average because I can put a tone wash over everything. Big fan of the Army Painter ones over that, but I've played with the Citadel blood effects ones, and you don't want it to be like a teenager thing, and I buy some of these ones on eBay and have to paint strip them where someone's got the sword and painted the whole thing red to make it look like blood. But there's some really good special effects out there for glowing and tone wash. So I'm on my paint desk, so I'm pointing to them as I say, but also the speed paints, and there's some really, really good effects out there, and I really enjoy that side of the hobby, because I think my favorite thing ever when I was growing up was the kit bashing and taking different sets and making your own bespoke model. But then to kind of experiment with paints feels a bit like alchemy, an old level, like kind of metallurgist kind of, can I make gold out of lead? And you're kind of mixing all these things together, and it starts to come. And I just really enjoy it. And I think that's the other side of the hobby for me, is I've moved to a very rural part of Scotland. Well, people in the Highlands would disagree, but I think it's a very rural part of Scotland. And I've got my dog, and I'm very happy. But this, to me, is my therapy. I come to my painting desk, I put on a podcast or genuinely a wargaming channel or something like that, or an episode or something, and I sit here for like 3-4 hours until my back starts to cramp up, and I just paint. And I'm very slow because I'm like scrolling my phone and looking at pictures, but it's great. That's to me is an evening well spent, and I'm really enjoying the fact I've got a big project now in front of me, and I've yeah, and got everything unboxed when I got back from Portugal, and I've made some progress, so it's quite satisfying.
Yeah, you've got a lot to do, and you've been showing me the stuff you've done already, which is a really good start. You're starting with all the fun stuff, but
I know that
as you
might be a
always do.
mistake, isn't it? I might need to do the ranks, but it's fun now talking about it, and I can see literally tucked away down the back is a load of grey Frenchmen, and I'm like, oh, I feel sorry because I only painted like 5 actually finished, so they almost like a literal grey part of the shame because they're undercoated grey, and I'm like, oh, I need to go back to them. I need to go back to dwarfs. I've got piles over there. If I showed you my, you know, the IKEA shelves that everybody has IKEA shelves. That's set.
Yeah.
That's completely full of unopened boxes that I went big on Warlord Game and Perry Miniature, French and British. I've also got a load of like French Resistance and British 1939 because at some point in my future I want to do a very British Civil War set because again suspending the history. I really want to do border reavers, which is an interesting part of British history, or the War of the Rough Wooing, which is one of my favorite war names apart from the War of Jenkins here, where late Tudors were coming up to this side of the border and taking all their cattle, but then they were doing it back, and some of the bigger battles like Battle of Pinkie, but both sides, they were basically, you read the historical accounts, it doesn't really matter which side was coming over the hill if you were a local farmer. It was going to be a bad day as you saw a load of horsemen. So there's kind of like farm raids and levels, but it also means that I could do some scenery based on some beautiful parts of Scotland or Northumberland. So there's now miniatures for that, and I really want to do a Peel Tower, which is a Scottish Borders defensive tower, because I visited a lot recently, and they're really quite nice structures. It's interesting to have a castle that doesn't have a moat and an outer wall as such. It's just kind of tower itself. It's a big tall tower, basically. But they tend to be on a little hill, and there'll be some sheep nearby. And it's just a part of history, British history, that we really don't talk about that much. And it's also on my doorstep. So I've held off buying those at the moment because I'm going old school Warhammer, but then I've got to go to Napoleonics, and then I was going to say I need to find the next project, but I think that's a few years down the line. So
it does sound like you've got a lot, and it's amazing how things go in cycles. And you were feeling guilty about your grey Napoleonics, but it'll be rereading something or listening to something or visiting a battlefield, and that's it. You'll get the urge, and you'll be, I'm just going to put these Empire away for a little while, and I'll get these back out again. A bit like when I dusted off the 28mm Napoleonics the other day, having decided I'll just leave the epics for a little while, having spoken to you, and they were miniatures from 5 years ago, before the channel, that's for sure. So it's amazing how these things come out again, blow the dust off the top of the box, and find their way back onto the painting queue, at least. Not
and
painted
I think there's
yet.
so much good inspiration out there. You know, certainly watching your Mordheim thing, I think was about the time that I was just about getting into it, and it just kind of accelerates. And so you kind of see these things, and it goes, oh, I've never wondered if they did a regiment that was based on this, like we were talking about Sharpe's Battle. So you've got the regiment Irlandesa, a fictional Irish exile battalion based on other exiles. You go, well, has anybody done that recently? And we could do whether that be in a regiment's worth or whether we do a couple of figures, you kind of go down that route. So there's always inspiration. And I think that's kind of where the history, the fiction, and the wargaming all kind of start to merge together. And that's what I like about it. There's also the potential there, obviously, with some of the battlefields to take travel battle games and hire a hall. And
yeah. That's it. Well, that's maybe another avenue to extend your battlefield tours, and because I imagine the people that join those tours, there's a percentage. I don't know how many, but I imagine there's a percentage of wargamers themselves. It's a healthy crossover there.
Oh, definitely a healthy crossover, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but this is your chance to pimp all of your things. So you talk about your YouTube and your X and your BlueSky and your Facebook. You've got a Facebook page as well that you put some of the stuff on. You just remembered, haven't you? I'll pop links anyway in the video description, but if you'd like to give a sort of a shout out to those things and where people can follow you and find you and enjoy your content.
That's very kind. Thank you. Yeah, so I suppose the YouTube's kind of a new one. I'm re-uploading my back catalogue, but I purposely took some short videos between filming. So first of all, I need to plug, in case anyone hasn't, Redcoat History. Christian there, great guy, and we've just about to release our new series that we just spent ages planning and filming, and it's gonna be good. The Peninsula War, following Duke of Wellington's battles with drone footage. We even got some reenactors out there as well. It was great, and we really enjoyed doing it. Then my own, I'm going to have to remember them all now. My own YouTube, I'm doing shorts. I kind of do like little one shots of me just kind of walking around, pointing at stuff for about a minute and a half. I think that's Marcus Cribb History on YouTube. That's quite fun. And I'd love to see that grow, because I'd love to do more over here, Scotland and north of England and bits like that. And it's something I want to spend time to. Twitter/X is mcribbhistory, or the joke mcribbhistory, depending on how you want to remember it. I put a lot of time and effort into that, so I hope Twitter doesn't get completely killed off. I'm on a similar thing for BlueSky, and then Facebook can be quite good. So that is all things Wellington, Marcus Cribb, and that's a big cover photo of me leading one of the battlefield tours at Waterloo, getting stood on a little hill, pointing at things. So I do try to interact with those things, often with things I see, things I learn, or videos I'm uploading, and I'm up for ideas, obviously. Travel cost limitation, but something I'm going to spend some time this summer doing is going to more British battlefields, including in Scotland, because there's so much history on our doorstep here, and I just want to see them. And the great thing about being in Scotland is you can see them and you can camp out next to them as well. So,
oh wow, definitely go and click on all those links. I love following you on X, because every day there's a picture and a little write-up, just little snippets of history. It's just that nice bite-sized stuff when you have your morning coffee, and it's really, really great and entertaining. And I really enjoyed watching all of your battlefield shorts. There's sort of, some of them are the new longer shorts now, which is great. So you've got 2 or 3 minutes when you're just talking around some of the things you've talked about, some amazing, beautiful landscapes, and landscapes you think, well, how could you fight here? It's just incredible, some of the things. So looking forward to seeing more of that stuff. So thank you very much for agreeing to come on and talk battlefield tours and history and wargaming with me. It was a real pleasure to have you on.
No, thank you so much for having me. I love sharing that, because we were saying before we pressed record, we both did hobby stuff and then went away from it and kind of had that moment of shame where you think, we'll try to pretend to be cool.
No.
And I'm very open about the hobby side of things, and I love talking about it now, because you get to talk to brilliant people and people sharing their ideas, and I'm always up for ideas in games. And hey, maybe from this, if people are in central Scotland and want to have a game of more time, I'm well up for that. Or Skirmish Napoleonics, maybe Skirmish Napoleonics.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much again to Marcus for giving up your time to come on and talk to me. If you've enjoyed all the stuff that Marcus has had to say, please do check out all of the links in the video description to his relevant social media, his website, and please do check out his YouTube channel. Some brilliant videos on there, and some of the shorts from his recent trip over to Portugal and Spain are super interesting, and I really can't wait for that series to come out on Redcoat History as well. If you'd like to support me further, also in the show notes you can check out my Patreon, check out all my affiliate links as well. They really are the best way of supporting the channel. But if you enjoyed the video, do give it a like, drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. But thank you very much for watching, take care, and I'll catch you soon.